Committee will come to order. The hearing today, who's watching the Watchmen, the oversight of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The committee is now in order. We make it a policy here on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee to read our mission statement. We exist to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have a right to know that the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers, because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. We will work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the federal bureaucracy. This is the mission of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. I now recognize myself for 4 minutes for an opening statement. Today's oversight hearing underscores the role of the United States Congress to scrutinize the implementation and enforcement of key provisions of the Dodd-Frank Act. The Consumer Financial Protections Bureau, which is the brainchild of today's first witness, has been hailed by some as a much-needed regulatory authority to limit the risk of financial fraud. Yet others, myself included, are skeptical that the Bureau's creation, structure, and broad discretionary powers are warranted. Nevertheless, Dodd-Frank is now the law of the land. And in a few short weeks, the Bureau will become a powerful instrument in the hands of progressive regulators. Once fully operational, the Bureau will possess virtually unchecked discretion to identify financial products and services that the Director determines to be, quote, unfair, deceptive, or abusive. To fund and execute this mandate, the law has granted the Bureau an unparalleled budgetary authority, free from congressional authorization, and an unacceptable degree of autonomy hidden from congressional oversight. While we have yet to hit the date of transfer of authority to the Bureau, Congress has a responsibility to assess, and the American people have a right to know the designs that Professor Warren has implemented in its creation. What controls are being created to protect the American people from abuse of government power? We demand internal controls of companies. What internal controls govern the Bureau? What limits are being set to guard them from administrative overreach? In the absence of the normal checks and balances established by the Constitution, what guarantees do the American people have that the Bureau will behave responsibly, spend wisely, and regulate fairly? Furthermore, in earlier testimony before the Financial Services Committee here in the House, Professor Warren asserted that the Bureau is, quote, the most constrained and the most accountable agency in government, end quote. Yet the lofty promise of restraint and accountability seems to be backed by the highest appeal threshold in regulatory history. In that same appearance, Professor Warren testified that the Bureau's role in ongoing mortgage settlement negotiations was limited to, quote, advice. Furthermore, one of her staffers then emails the press and defines the role and the quote of advice defined by Merriam-Webster. Since her testimony, however, Congress received evidence that Professor Warren and the Bureau were deeply involved in the negotiations. The emergence of the Bureau's, quote, settlement presentation, end quote, and the fact that Professor Warren has been in dozens of meetings with federal and state officials about these settlements raised concerns about the veracity of her earlier testimony. This hearing, however, is not about a confirmation hearing for Professor Warren or a potential Senate race. This hearing is about the mission, policy, and structure that affect the creation and implementation of the Bureau. It is also the need for critical oversight of an agency which has so vast oversight authority over large portions of the American economy. Simply stated, who's watching the Watchmen? The Constitution creates a government that protects the freedoms of the American people, not one that provides for them. It empowers the people through their elected officials who are directly accountable to them, not a superclass of administrative elites. Protecting American consumers from abusive institutions and unaccountable authorities is the first priority of this committee and the United States Congress. Today we'll examine whether the key provisions of the Dodd-Frank Act serve this purpose. With that, I yield 4 minutes to the ranking member, Mr. Quigley of Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like any government agency, this new agency needs vigilant oversight from Congress and this committee. But we should not obstruct it from carrying out the intent of the Dodd-Frank Act. Millions of Americans are still suffering the consequences of the housing and financial crisis. This crisis was caused in large part by weak or non-existent regulation. These regulatory failures allowed dangerous consumer financial products and toxic financial instruments to infiltrate the marketplace. Before Dodd-Frank, consumer financial protection responsibilities were scattered across 7 different agencies. Unscrupulous lenders were able to take advantage of consumers by selling them faulty, fraudulent, and deceptive financial products. This reckless lending poisoned the financial system and directly contributed to the mortgage meltdown. While today we may have the benefit of hindsight, some sounded alarm well in advance of the crisis. In 2007, before the onset of the crisis, Professor Elizabeth Warren recognized that there was a serious problem. Quote, "Nearly every product sold in America has passed basic safety regulations well in advance of reaching store shelves," she observed. But credit products, by comparison, are regulated by a tattered patchwork of state and federal laws that have failed to adapt to changing markets. This new agency was explicitly designed to address these regulatory shortcomings. Just like the Consumer Product Safety Commission protects consumers against exploding toasters, the new agency will protect consumers against faulty mortgages. One of the CFPB's strengths is its accountability. The CFPB has capped a budget, its actions are subject to a veto by the Financial Stability Oversight Council, and it must follow stricter rulemaking procedures than most other agencies. Another strength is the CFPB's focus on the, quote, shadow financial services sector, which has been the most responsible for victimizing consumers. These unregulated lenders will, for the first time, be held to the same standards as banks and credit unions. Our #1 priority on this committee must be ensuring that we never have a repeat of the financial crisis and that the CFPB is a strong step in the right direction. The CFPB has won early praise, even from financial industry groups that were initially hesitant to support it. But both the ICBA and the ABA have praised the Bureau for its transparent and accessible rulemaking process. On that point, I ask unanimous consent that the May 19, 2011 article from the American Banker titled, quote, "New CFPB Mortgage Disclosures Win Praise for Content and Process" be submitted for the record.
Without objection.
This transparency is especially important given the CFPB's mandate to increase transparency in the consumer lending market. I'm confident Ms. Warren and the CFPB can continue to build on its early successes, and both consumers and businesses will be stronger for it. It is critical that the CFPB be implemented as set forth in the Dodd-Frank Act. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. Members will have 7 days to submit opening statements and extraneous material for the record. It is pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn before they testify. And if you'll stand and raise your right hand and repeat after me. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? The record will indicate that the witness answered in the affirmative. Our first panel, our sole witness on our first panel is Ms. Elizabeth Warren, who serves as the Assistant to the President and Special Advisor to the Secretary of Treasury for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau at the U.S. Department of Treasury. Ms. Warren, you're well accustomed to testifying before Congress, and so we have a system of lights, and with 1 minute remaining, you'll get the yellow light. You have 5 minutes to give your opening statement or to summarize your opening statement. We'll move forward with questions thereafter. You're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Let me hit the light. Thank you, Chairman McHenry, Ranking Member Quigley, and members of the subcommittee for inviting me today to testify about the work of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. You know, 2.5 years ago, I came to Washington to serve Congress as chair of the TARP Congressional Oversight Panel. I developed a keen appreciation for the important role of oversight, and I respect careful oversight work. For today's hearing, I've prepared 10 pages of written testimony to document our startup efforts, and that supplements the 34 pages of testimony I provided for the Subcommittee on Financial Institutions and Consumer Credit in March. In my testimony, I discussed the Consumer Bureau's straightforward mission to make prices and risks clear and to cut down on the fine print so customers can make straight-up comparisons among financial products, so they can compare 2 or 3 or 4 credit cards or 3 or 4 mortgages before they actually sign on the dotted line. That's what Congress created the Consumer Agency to do, and that's what we're already doing. Last week, after months of consultation with borrowers and lenders and their representatives, we started testing a prototype of the mortgage shopping sheet. Eventually, the result of this process will be a simple, streamlined mortgage disclosure to replace the longer, more complicated, and more burdensome forms that are now required by law. Now, in this process, we have taken another step, something pretty much unprecedented in the regulatory world. We have invited everyone in the door early, before the cake is baked. We are months away from formal rulemaking, but we believe that by opening up our process and getting help from the people who are affected by these rules, we will be more likely to produce something that works right. We have posted early versions of the form on our website, www.consumerfinance.gov. Come and see us there. And we've asked people to let us know what they think. So far, a lot of people have been willing to help. Within hours after our posting of the new forms, we had more than 20,000 visits to our website. The reaction to the forms has been almost unanimously favorable. The article that Congressman Quigley referred to in the American Banker was headlined, "New CFPB Mortgage Disclosures Win Praise for Content and Process." You know, a lot of very different people have been supportive throughout this process. The Consumer Federation of America and the American Enterprise Institute, U.S. PIRG, and the Financial Services Roundtable have all been supportive. The draft forms are not perfect. We're only at the beginning. But the process really matters. It's an example of how a new federal agency can shed some of the old bureaucratic attitudes and develop ideas and approaches that serve both consumers and businesses. Mr. Chairman, the title of this hearing is "Who Watches the Watchmen?" The answer can be found in a single word: everyone. At the Consumer Agency, we aren't just talking about transparency and openness. We are living it right now. We are building an agency that involves American families, small banks, credit unions, and other financial services providers in our work from the ground up. Recently, there have been many overblown claims about the nature of the Consumer Agency's powers. Critics claim that the CFPB is, quote, "the most powerful regulatory agency that's ever been put together," and that it is, quote, "the most powerful agency ever created." The Consumer Agency isn't even the strongest of the banking regulators, much less the most powerful agency ever created. Those kinds of claims disregard the significant limits on the Consumer Bureau's authorities, the long debates over these issues more than a year ago, and the very meaningful oversight that Congress imposes on the Bureau's functioning. Those claims also ignore the intensity with which large and powerful interests watch everything we do and make certain that their views are carefully considered. Most importantly, those claims ignore what we are doing, building an agency in plain sight with help from good people across this country. Together, we can create a fairer system that works for families and works for the community banks, for the credit unions, and for the other financial institutions that want to serve those families honestly and openly. Thank you for inviting me here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Warren. Thank you for your testimony. And I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Warren, if the President makes you the CFPB's first director through recess appointment, would you accept it? Yes or no would be fine.
There we go. Congressman, it is
yes or no would be fine.
It is up to the President of the United States under Dodd-Frank to make a nomination. It would not be appropriate, I think, for anyone to be speculating
As
about
Assistant to the President for Consumer Financial Protection, you're advising the President about the nomination for this Bureau, are you not?
Congressman, I've tried to help the President in any way I can on the nomination process.
Have you recommended anyone?
Congressman, I've tried to help the President.
That's fine. If you don't want to answer, that's fine. Okay.
I've been doing
reclaiming
this for
my
a month.
time. I understand. You don't want to answer, and that's fine. I'd call up for the, if you look at the screen, we have a PowerPoint presentation. Now, when I last asked you questions, which was before the March 16th House Financial Service Committee meeting, hearing, you respond, I ask about your role in the mortgage settlement issue and the CFPB's role there. You said, quote, "We have been asked for advice, and wherever we can be helpful, we are not only glad to be helpful, we are proud to be helpful." Slide 1, as you see, this document is dated February 14th, a month before you answered that question and gave that answer. Apparently, it's authored by the CFPB. Are you familiar with this document?
Congressman, I believe, although obviously...
Are you familiar with it, yes or no?
Congressman, I haven't seen the rest of the pages, but I assume that what this document is a document that was initially prepared for internal discussions with the Secretary of the Treasury.
Right. At the bottom left corner, if I might point out, it says draft confidential for A.G. Miller. Are you familiar with that?
Thank you very much. Yes, Congressman, I am.
Okay. Second slide. This slide, and the second slide indicates that the CFPB is pushing for significant policy change. Third slide. This quote indicates that the CFPB is leading the charge to persuade other regulators to demand punitive penalties. Fourth slide. If you look at the fourth slide, it's apparent that the CFPB is pushing a policy proposal called the Principal Reduction Mandate. Is that something that the CFPB has been pushing?
Congressman, if you want to ask about our participation in...
I know I'm going to get to that. I'm asking a question. If you could respond to my question, I would certainly appreciate that.
Congressman, we've given our advice when we've been asked for advice.
Okay.
And
Thank
we have
you.
done so proudly and enthusiastically.
So if you were so proud and enthusiastic about your advocacy and advice, why didn't you express that before the committee when I asked you your involvement in the settlement issue?
Congressman, I thought the quote you quoted said exactly that. And I believe it said that I was proud to give that advice, and I thought there was some word of enthusiasm.
Let me give you the fuller quote here. When the Treasury came to me and said we would like your advice, I was glad to.
Glad to.
Right. A.G. Miller.
Was there more? I just lost it.
Who is Attorney General Miller?
I believe Attorney General Miller is the Attorney General for the state of Iowa.
Okay. That is different than advice to the Treasury Secretary, which is part of your job title, and advice to the President, is it not?
I'm sorry, is what different? Is the Attorney General different from the Secretary of the Treasury?
You said you were providing advice to the Treasury Secretary.
That's right,
in your sworn testimony.
Yes.
And what is now apparent is you're providing advice to the Attorney General of Iowa and their suit against mortgage servicers. Is that correct?
Congressman, the Secretary of the Treasury asked for advice, and we gave advice. We also gave advice at his instruction. We gave advice to other Federal agencies, and we gave advice where asked.
Okay.
I think we've tried to make that clear.
In terms of the mortgage settlement talks, would you disclose the meetings that you've had about those mortgage settlement talks?
Congressman, I believe that my calendar is an open book. that we've been posting my calendar since last October, last November. I actually can't remember.
So your
But
calendar would entail when you have discussions about the mortgage settlement?
I can say my calendar is an open book. We make
I understand
it a part
you're
of
saying
the public record.
I understand, reclaiming my time. So it's gone beyond your advice to Treasury. You're also providing advice to other governmental agencies.
Congressman,
I understand. You can use the word Congressman a number of times, Ms. Warren, but I'm simply asking a very simple question: who you're providing advice to.
Congressman, there was a question on this from Chairman
I know. I'm
Backus,
asking you a question,
and what I want
which
to
is
do
different than that, Ms. Warren.
Well,
if you'll
this
answer
is-
my question, are you giving advice to any governmental agency outside of Treasury and the President? Yes or no?
Congressman, let me read the letter that I sent almost 2 months ago.
My time has expired. I'm asking you a yes or no question.
We have provided advice to Federal and State officials regarding a potential settlement, servicing settlement. In doing so, we have been an active participant in interagency discussions, sharing our analysis and recommendations in support of a resolution that would hold accountable any servicers that violated the law. We sent this letter nearly 2 months ago. We've not heard back from you or from anyone else, so far as I know, in the House of Representatives or in Congress. This is a statement. We have given
I certainly
advice
appreciate
when
your
asked.
statement. I have one final question.
Yes,
have you been in meetings with the Department of Justice regarding the mortgage settlement issue? Yes or
Yes,
no?
we have given advice to the Department of Justice when asked. As we say here, we have provided advice
thank you for your
to
testimony.
Federal
I now
and
recognize
State officials.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor, it's obviously serious when someone accuses anyone of lying to Congress, but let's just walk back through this. First, as was mentioned, the definition of advice. Somehow it will magically appear. If not, Random House defines it as an opinion or recommendation offered as a guide to action. So, Professor, you were asked to provide advice by another agency involved in these negotiations. Is that correct?
Yes, Congressman, it is.
Did you provide advice in response?
Yes, Congressman, we did.
Okay. Did you provide options for how the Federal Government might proceed in those negotiations?
Congressman, that's what we've tried to do, is give advice, as we said here, shared our analysis and recommendation. That's what we're trying to do.
Did you ever talk directly with the private parties to those negotiations?
Congressman, it is not our job to negotiate on behalf of the Federal agencies. That undertaking is led by the Department of Justice at the Federal level. What we have done is tried to be helpful to those regulators who are trying to hold those who broke the law accountable for their actions.
If the Department of Justice ends up taking your advice, that would give some qualities or reference to how good your advice was, correct?
Congressman, what they ultimately decide, I'm sure, will be a mix of many things. I hope we have given good advice. I mean, let me say this as clearly as I can, Congressman. This is our job, and we are trying to do our job, and that is to be helpful to other agencies, to work with other agencies in trying to hold those who break the law accountable for their misdeeds.
Well, and unfortunately, many of these entities that you'll be regulating as a new agency are mortgage servicing companies that have already admitted to breaking the law, that they have illegally foreclosed on U.S. service members and their families, for example, that they have charged inflated fees, and they have perpetrated fraud on the courts. You're aware of those admissions as well, correct?
Yes, Congressman. I'm aware now that the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the Office of Thrift Supervision, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and the Federal Reserve Bank have all found serious, widespread deficiencies. They have found violations of local law, of state law, and of federal law that have damaged families, that have damaged mortgage markets, and that have damaged the entire economy.
Sort of a David and Goliath discussion, but it flips on its side to an extent. You're being accused of being an all-powerful, monolithic type Goliath, but the reality is your budget is probably going to be about 1% of what these agencies have been charging just in credit card penalties and overdraft penalties. So I guess the question is, how are you going to keep up with them?
Congressman, I think that's a tough question, but I believe that the Consumer Financial Protection Agency is well crafted so that we are going to be able to make a significant difference, that we're going to be an effective cop on the beat. We will have responsibilities in the rule writing area, doing research, and as our new mortgage project shows, doing what we can to make sure that our rules are streamlined and efficient and effective. We will have responsibilities in supervision and in enforcement. In fact, about half of our budget will go to supervision and enforcement. We will have responsibilities in consumer complaint to hear from Americans around the country when they have problems with credit providers, and we will have responsibilities for financial education. We've got a lot to do, but the good part is I think those things work together, work in concert. We have a real opportunity here to make prices clear, to make risks clear, to give families the opportunity to compare one product with 2 or 3 others. And when that happens, markets can start to work. They can start to work on behalf of American families.
In the end, all we have is our good name. Is there anything else you'd like to say about allegations that have been made?
You know, Congressman, all I can say is a deep honor to be here to try to set up an agency that is designed to be a voice for American families. They've been shut out of this process for far too long. This most recent crisis was the consequence of a substantial—
Gentleman's time's expired. You can finish your thought, then we'll move to the next question.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I'll just say this most recent crisis started one lousy mortgage at a time. If we had had a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau in place, we could have avoided a lot of the pain that we've gone through in the last 2.5 years. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the ranking member, and with that, Ms. Burkle of New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for calling this hearing, and thank you to Ms. Warren for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Dodd-Frank bill that passed last year included sweeping reforms in the regulation and the oversight of the financial industry. And while it made many changes, it completely ignored, and you just alluded to this in your last comment, it completely ignored reforming Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, whose poor business practices led to massive losses and taxpayer bailouts. Instead of addressing the problems created by political appointees, Dodd-Frank sought to increase the level of government regulation with the creation of a new regulatory body, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The thing that concerns me about this new regulatory body is that the House does not get to approve the director, and even worse, it appears that the administration is going to install political appointees using a recess appointment process. This takes it away from the Senate and the House and an opportunity to question and to do what they should be doing as elected representatives. My question to you today has to do with the salaries of the folks who are going to work in this Consumer Finance Bureau. If you, a quick look at your website lists job openings that you're seeking to fulfill in D.C. and 3 other cities, Chicago, New York, and San Francisco. After a close look at these openings, I found that the starting salaries with the CFPB are in most cases 60 to 90% higher than the GS equivalent listed on the federal government's website. So my question to you, my first question to you is, given the absolute fiscal constraints that this nation faces, the deficit and the debt that this country is trying to grapple with and trying to get this country back on a fiscal sanity course, how do you justify that kind of a disparity in salaries between a government worker versus the folks who are going to be hired by your regulatory agency? You know,
Congresswoman, I really appreciate your question and your concerns in this area. You know, and when you talk about the structure, the new structure for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, I know that you're aware that This new Bureau was designed to pick up consumer laws and consumer responsibilities that have been scattered among 7 different agencies, none of those agencies focusing on consumer practices and consumer products. This is important in the context of the most recent financial crisis. The reason so many people across this country are unemployed, so many millions of families are losing their home, and others have lost their savings, and that is the question of what kind of regulatory structure do we want, including what kind of pay structure. And I think you're right to raise this. Dodd-Frank was very careful and thoughtful in its point, and that was to say, in effect, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the principal banking regulator in the country, is paid at one level.
Excuse me if I could interrupt, because as you know, we only have 5 minutes here.
Yes, ma'am.
Let me just give you an example. There's 10 positions, and it's the Consumer Response Policy and Procedure Analyst. Starting salary range for that position is $72,000 in your regulatory body. The top salary range is $149,000. Now, the GS equivalent of that is a GS-9. In the federal government, a GS-9 starts at $41,000, and the top salary is $54,000. My question to you is, why are these folks getting paid such an exorbitant amount more than someone in the federal government system? And you're not answering my question. You're going around.
I'm sorry, Congresswoman. I'm trying to give it the context about we're following the law set up in Dodd-Frank. The 5 banking regulators that exist today, the Federal Reserve Bank, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the Office of Thrift Supervision, the FDIC, those banking regulators are paid on a different pay scale. And the reason they are paid on a different pay scale, in part, is because they are bank regulators, and the competition for those jobs include people who are in the financial services industry. We'll never be able to pay like the financial services industry pays. But this was Congress's judgment.
Excuse me, because I only have 17. This is a government agency. This is not the private sector. And we, the Congress, the government, needs to be accountable to the American people why someone can come into this government agency and make starting salary $72,000 with a range of $149,000. It just seems like I think that this regulatory body has some questions to answer regarding the huge disparity in the federal jobs versus the job salaries that you're offering. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the member, and now recognize the full committee ranking member, Mr. Cummings of Maryland, for 5 minutes.
Can you start my time? I just said they already got 21 seconds.
No, it was previous time.
All right.
We'll give you the full time.
Thank you.
We'll start over right now.
Thank you.
Hold on 1 second.
Okay.
We'll pause so we.
All right.
full time.
It's like
Go
a
right
basketball
ahead.
game. All right. Ms. Warren, first of all, let me say this. I don't care what happens in this hearing today. I don't care what is said. I'm begging you to keep the fire. I've got constituents who have lost so much, and they don't even know how they lost it. And we need you. We really desperately need your passion, your concern, and thank you for synchronizing your conscience with your conduct. And I just want you to know that. Now, you know, one of the things that is so significant, one of the things that you're doing for us, and part of your mission is to protect consumers from unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts or practices and from discrimination. Every single member of Congress have got people, whether they know it or not, who have suffered and have lost. And like I said, some of them don't even know what they lost and how they lost. They still don't know. And so, you know, Professor Warren, ranking member, quickly said something that I agree with. He said your situation is like David and Goliath. And let me ask you about the consumer resources compared to the fees generated by banks you're supposed to regulate. According to the firm R.K. Hammer, consumers paid more than $20 billion, that's our constituents, in credit card penalty fees in 2009. The same year, consumers paid more than $38 billion in overdraft fees, our constituents. So that's about $59 billion in 1 year, and that's just some of the fees they generated. Professor Warren, your budget at the Consumer Bureau will be capped at about $600 million. Is that right?
Yes, sir, it is.
Now let me get this straight. Let me show you a chart. if my math is correct, the Consumer Bureau's budget is only 1%. Where's my chart? You got my chart up?
There it is, sir.
All right, don't get my chart. The Consumer Bureau's budget is only about 1% of the amount banks generate just from late fees and overdraft fees. I have to ask you, how in the world will you be able to compete against this Goliath when you are so mismatched?
You know, Congressman, it's a good and a fair question, but I want to say this. I think in the creation of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Congress made some very smart moves. And one of the key ones is that we have the capacity at the consumer agency to drive toward making the price clear, making the risk clear, making it easy, not 111 pages of documentation and fine print, but making it easy for families to compare one product to another. I ultimately believe that the real partners for this agency will be families all over this country who, if they've got clear and simple information in front of them, if they can really make apples-to-apples comparisons, will be able to turn this market around so that those providers, those community banks, those credit unions, those providers who in good faith are willing to get out there and compete in the marketplace, they're willing to offer the most value at the lowest price, or they're willing to offer good customer service that draws people in, that those will be the providers who will flourish in consumer credit, ultimately serving families. So I believe we can do this, sir.
You know, Radio 1, Kathy Hughes has a slogan, and she says, information is power. Information is powerful when you use it. And so I think that summarizes pretty much what you're saying. Give them the information and let them run with it and make decisions based on sound information. Now, some people are saying that you are the Goliath. Incredible. They say you are going to overrun the industry with overbearing regulations and a complete lack of accountability. But isn't it true that your rulemaking power can be vetoed by the Financial Stability Oversight Council? Vetoed. Is that right?
Yes, Congressman, it is.
Does any other bank regulator have that kind of requirement?
No, Congressman, they do not.
You're not looking too much like a Goliath to me so far. And to issue regulations, you have to make particularized findings and consult with other banking regulators. Is that right?
Yes, sir, it is.
I understand that the banks want to protect their fees, just like the oil companies in the Gulf want to protect their profits. But as I said at this morning, we had a hearing this morning on oil. We cannot go back to the era of inadequate protection for the American people. And so I want to thank you for everything you're doing. I want to thank your staff for everything they're doing. And again, there are people in my district who applaud what you are doing, and may God bless you. Stay on the battlefield.
Thank you, sir.
Gentleman's time has expired, and now recognize Mr. Gint of New Hampshire for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Warren, for being here today. I wish this wouldn't have to be described as a battlefield. Rather than that, I would like to see a more productive manner in which we could solve the nation's problems. I do have some questions, though, about the formation of this entity and the need for its existence and how it plans to operate. And I'm sure you could appreciate that some members of Congress do have questions given the unique nature of this entity. The first question I want to ask is can you quickly describe how unique this is in comparison to other bank regulator organizations in terms of who you have overseeing you?
Well, like the OCC, we have a single director.
Yep.
Unlike the OCC, any rule that comes out of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau can be overruled by a group of other regulators. I'm trying to think. Like the OCC, we have rulemaking authority. We're subject to the Administrative Procedures Act. Unlike the OCC, we are also subject to, I think the acronym is SBREFA, the small business panels, that we have to bring in panels to be able to go through the impact on small businesses. We are required to do cost-benefit analyses. We're required to consult with the other banking regulators before we issue rules. I think it's fair to say that our charter is written very much in mind with the notion that we are there to be cooperative with the other banking regulators, at least to work with them. We are trying to think. We are. We have a research function that is somewhat different from the other regulators.
Can you tell me why there is a necessity for a 5-year fixed term when I don't believe anyone else in history has had that period of time as an appointment?
Congressman, I think many terms are 5-year fixed terms. It's my understanding that the head of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency finished his 5-year term last August.
But I think those entities,
I'm sorry,
those entities, I think, are at the discretion of Congress. There is an oversight process through appropriations. You're excluded from that.
No, Congressman, I'm sorry, but that's not the rule with the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. There is no banking regulator who is subject to the political process or to appropriations. All banking regulators are funded independently, and indeed, all of the other banking regulators, not the consumer agency, but all of the other banking regulators are able to set their own funding levels. So, for example, if the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency decides they need more money to run exams or they need more money to engage in their other activities, they up the assessment on banks and simply raise more money. There's no oversight from Congress in that process.
So do you have an idea of what your budget's going to be?
The cap on our budget is set at just under $600 million. The actual budget I actually have brought with me because I knew that you wanted to do oversight on this. Our estimates for fiscal year 2011 are $143 million, and our estimate for fiscal year 2012 is $329 million. So at least as best we can project in the next 2 years, we will be substantially under the caps that are set by Congress in the Dodd-Frank Act.
And of the 7 separate agencies that you're going to assume authority over, do you plan on hiring from those agencies?
Congressman, we have already begun the process of hiring some people. I believe it's the case from I think it's the case from each of the federal agencies. We have certainly been in talks with all 7 agencies. We have been
Gentleman's time's expired. Please finish your thought.
We have been very lucky to have detailees from each of those federal agencies come and help us in the stand-up process, and then we've gone through an interview process. I would be glad to describe it in more detail, but I understand I'm past time. It's your call.
I would just state to the Chairman the reason I'm asking that question is earlier the witness had stated that if this entity had existed, we wouldn't have the financial meltdown that we had. So I wonder why we would hire people from those other agencies who were doing this oversight in the first place.
Thank you. And now recognize Ms. Maloney of New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I truly believe the title of this hearing today, and really the GOP efforts in general, should be let's pretend the financial crisis never happened. Let's forget that 15 trillion families lost household wealth in America, that our financial community was brought to its knees and had to be bailed out by the American taxpayer. And in response to this crisis, with overwhelming support from the American people, we created the CFPB, and it is carefully constructed, urgently needed, and should be allowed to go into operation as planned by the bill that was signed into law by President Obama. Now, the CFPB fills a gaping hole in our regulatory framework. This is a body that will focus completely and totally on consumer financial protection. Too often, consumer protection was a second thought, a third thought, or not even thought about at all. So you came out with abusive and anti-competitive practices and credit cards, subprime loans that had a degree of probability of throwing American families out on the street and hurting our financial system. So this was put in place to help our overall economy and to help consumers. And all of the efforts so far have been to dismantle, disrupt, delay, and not allow the agency to go into effect. There was an astonishing abuse of power, of confirmation power in the Senate. 44 senators signed a letter that said, we will not allow this agency to go into effect or for you to confirm a director unless you pass bills that will destroy it, that will make it meaningless, that will make it ineffective. That's not what the confirmation process is supposed to be. It's literally holding the entire government hostage to their demands on dismantling this program. And I would say that there is a lot of unfounded concern about lack of oversight on this agency. I would argue that the oversight and balance of power over this agency is greater than any other agency in the entire federal government, with audits and requirements and the unprecedented ability of another agency, the Financial Stability Oversight Council, to overrule the decisions made by the CFPB. No other, I don't believe any other government agency has that ability to overrule another agency. Would you comment on that, Dr. Warren?
Yes, Congresswoman. So far as I know, there is no agency anywhere in the federal government whose rulings, once arrived at through the full process, through hearings, through fact-finding, all the way through, could actually be overruled by a group of other agencies. It is unprecedented.
So how many other banking regulators can be overruled? Can banking regulators be overruled with, say, a faulty mortgage product? Can they be overruled?
No, Congresswoman. Right now, there is no banking regulator who can be overruled.
And could you go through and outline some of the oversight and really constraints? No other agency has their budget capped, I don't believe.
You know, I appreciate your bringing up the question of budget because I think it's so important here, Congresswoman. As Congress has known since the middle of the 1800s, when they made the decision in the establishment of the first bank regulator to make the funding for that regulator outside the appropriations and political process, we knew that we wanted banking regulators that at a minimum were not glancing over their shoulders as they walked into trillion-dollar financial institutions to try to do supervision or enforcement. They're not glancing over their shoulders wondering if something they do, something they say will create problems and increased lobbying efforts against the agency next time around in the political process. This agency, and as a result, all of the banking regulators are set up so they determine their own funding. It's not just that they're out of the political process, they decide the number of dollars that they get. The consumer agency is capped. If we need more money for supervision and enforcement, our only option is to come to Congress. But we are capped, and there is only a certain amount of money that comes to this agency to carry out its functions before we would be forced to go into the political process.
Well, I want to thank you for your testimony and your hard work. My time has expired, but I would say those who want to gut this agency want to leave consumers prey to unscrupulous mortgage efforts and credit card abuses. So I believe this agency is important. We should allow it to go forward and be implemented. Thank you.
Mr. Gowdy of South Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Warren. The first question I'm going to ask you is directly from a constituent of mine in South Carolina, who is in the business of providing financial services. What steps will you take to ensure that complaints received by the Bureau are legitimate ones and not merely post-contractual gripes against a company when the consumer decides they don't want to live with the terms?
Well, Congressman, I'm glad you asked about the complaint system. It's one of the most significant features, I think, of the new consumer agency. And what we're planning to do with it is, instead of having sort of a general complaint line, we're really trying to develop more effective complaint resolution in the consumer agency on a product-by-product basis. So, for example, we'll be starting with credit cards. And what we're hoping to do is we're working on setting up a hotline and a form online for people who have had problems with their credit card issuers, and they believe perhaps that there have been violations of law and want to get in touch with the new consumer agency.
Will the complaints be made public? Because I think you'll agree with me that unfounded, unsubstantiated complaints have a deleterious effect on the accused.
So what we'll be doing, and I really want to give a shout out here to 5 of the largest credit card companies in the country who are working with us right now on a way that as soon as we receive a complaint, that complaint can go directly to the credit card companies. They can help us understand whether the complaint has merit. They have the opportunity to try to resolve it with the customer, keeping us in the loop on what's going on.
Is that just for credit card companies, or is it for all financial service providers?
So here's what I want to make clear. As we build this—
I've only got 5 minutes. I'm not trying to cut you off, but there are other things I'd like to ask you.
Fair enough, sir. I'm just trying to give you a picture
Are
of
the
what we're
complaints
doing.
public? Well, let's try that with a yes and no answer.
Congressman, I've tried to describe the process for one product. We're trying to get this product right, and we've had a lot of cooperation from the credit card companies.
I'm probably not answering my question very artfully.
No.
Are the complaints public, yes or no?
Congressman, there is no single answer for all products in the same way.
Are any of the complaints public?
Congressman, we don't have any complaints yet. What we're trying to do is build a system to deal with
So you do have the discretion to keep the complaints non-public if you like.
What we're trying to do is work with the industry to find a complaint system that works for American families and works for those who are providing them services. We're in the middle of that process. This is part of stand-up, and we are glad, Congressman, to hear from you, to hear from your constituents, and to hear from everyone else about this process. We're an open door on this subject.
Well, thank you. I will encourage them to participate. I want to ask you about some of the definitions. I saw in a definition for abusive. See if I can. Materially interferes with the ability of a consumer to understand a term of condition of a consumer financial product or service. That suggests to me that some interferences are immaterial. Is that what you meant by that?
Congressman, I believe the language you're quoting is out of the Dodd-Frank Act, and it's Congress's intention. Not, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I don't have a copy of it with me here.
Will you not be the one enforcing that?
Congressman,
will you set regulations that define these terms?
Congressman, this is the guidance that Congress has given.
I'm asking you, are some interferences immaterial?
Congressman, we will go through the process of interpreting the language that Congress has given us.
I don't mean for that to be a trick question. Are some interferences immaterial? Because the word material modifies interference.
Congressman, I want to be clear about this. It's statutory language that you're asking. There's a process in place for the Consumer Bureau. You don't want me standing here shooting from the hip about how I might want to interpret individual language.
Well, let me ask you about the second one. It also defines it as an unreasonable advantage or taking unreasonable advantage of a consumer's lack of understanding. Are there some instances where taking advantage of a consumer's lack of understanding are reasonable?
Congressman, this is the language that Congress has adopted in the Dodd-Frank Act. Ultimately, it will fall to this Bureau through a lengthy process to interpret this on a case-by-case basis. I believe it would be irresponsible for me to stand here and pop off about how I would interpret particular words.
Do
There's
you
a
believe that
reason-
there's a duty to educate or a duty to learn on behalf of the consumer?
I believe that consumers want to learn. I think they want to know
Well,
what
that's a
their
different
products
question.
are.
I didn't ask whether or not they wanted to. Do you believe that there's a duty to do it, since the law itself says consumers' inability to protect his own interests? Do you agree that there's a duty to educate yourself?
Congressman, we have, as part of our responsibility under the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau laws, undertaking consumer financial education. And I embrace this. I think it is exactly where this agency should be.
Is that a yes?
We are going to help consumers by giving them products where prices are clear, where risks are clear, where they can make comparisons.
Is there a duty to educate yourself, yes or no?
I believe that an empowered consumer is a consumer who can not only protect himself or herself, but one who can change the market.
Mr. Chairman, I give up.
Thank you. We have 2 votes on the House floor. We have 2 additional members and not enough time for them to ask questions. We're going to recess until the second vote is cast. We'll come back over here as quickly as possible, and we'll have our final members ask their questions. And the committee is in recess until we return. That was never the pledge. We have 2 additional members with questions, and originally this hearing was at 2 o'clock. Are you not able to stay for these?
Congressman, when you asked to change the time 4 times in the last 12 hours, including waking people up at home last night to change the time again.
Ms. Warren, let me be
The
direct
agreement-
with you. I never made a single phone call about this.
I'm sorry,
So
when
be
your
very
staff-
clear about what you're saying. We have 2 additional members. We have 8 minutes remaining on the floor to vote. If you won't stay around for the questions, then we're going to stay around and we're going to finish this out.
Congressman,
I never heard that you had to leave at 2:15, which is the time.
Congressman, you might want to have a conversation with your staff. When they asked us to move the hearing, we said the only way we could do this is if I could leave here at 2:15 for a meeting that would be at 2:30.
All right, then we're going
And
for
your staff agreed
questions
to.
now. Ms. Yarmouth, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to say for the record that I apologize to the witness, Dr. Warren, for the rude and disrespectful behavior of the chair, the snarky comments about a Senate race, and the questioning of your veracity when there's documented evidence that you were being totally truthful indicates to me that this hearing is all about impugning you because people are afraid of you and your ability to communicate in very clear terms the threats to our consumers, the threats to our constituents, and possibly very, very effective ways to combat them. So I think in one respect, I congratulate you for instilling such fear in the committee, on the majority side, and in some aspects of or segments of the business community because they understand how effective you are in getting the message out to the American people that there are better ways to do things. Now, that being said, one of the major questions that's being asked here is whether there's a need for your agency or the agency that you conceived in light of the fact that there are 7 related agencies, all of whom have some authority in this area. These 7 agencies have been around for some time. During the time that those 7 agencies have been around, have financial products, the disclosure statements and so forth gotten easier to understand? Has the type gotten bigger? Have they shrunk? Or in fact, have they gotten much more incomprehensible?
Congressman, during the time these agencies have been around, I believe that financial products have become more complicated and much more heavily laden with fine print that effectively make it impossible for consumers to compare risks and costs.
In respect to the question that Ms. Burkle asked regarding the comparative salaries, would you be willing to speculate on what the average salary is of the people who are writing financial agreements, mortgages, and credit card agreements for the major corporations compared to what the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau would be paying?
Congressman, I couldn't begin to speculate on the difference between the salaries of the government officials who will be hired into the new consumer agency to try to oversee this market and the salaries of those who are writing the financial products, particularly for the Wall Street companies. I suspect, though, sir, there is a large differential. I
suspect you're right. And I'm going to yield back the balance of my time in a second so that we can get out of here. But I just want to say that the question of accountability.
And if the gentleman yield, I'll say that Mr. Issa went to vote. He's coming back to ask his question. Mr. Walsh went to vote. He's coming back to ask his question.
Thank you, Mr.
So
Chairman.
we'll give you 20 additional seconds
Okay,
for my interruption. Go right ahead.
That's quite all right. But the title of the hearing involves accountability of your agency. I'd just like you to spend a few seconds talking about what accountability there has been in terms of the credit card companies, mortgage writers, and so forth over the last decade or so, because it seems to me that that's where the real accountability issue has been, that the consumers have no way to hold those companies accountable for the products that they offer.
Congressman, we have seen very little accountability among the largest financial services providers and among the largely unregulated financial services providers, both before the crash of 2008 and after the crash of 2008. And I just want to point out that has been really hard on American families. It's been hard on them directly when they've gotten their feet tangled in credit card agreements and payday loans that were deceptive. It's been hard on them when they thought they were doing sensible things on mortgages only to learn that they were going to lose their homes. But it's also been hard on others in the economy, people who did nothing to get involved with financial services but who lost their jobs, people who see the companies, the small businesses they're working for, their markets have dried up. And it has also been hard on community banks, on credit unions, who work so hard day in and day out to work with their customers, to be the relationship lenders, to be there over the long haul, and who are getting crushed in a financial turnaround that was not their fault. The problems have gone everywhere. The problem of lack of accountability is one that is squarely on the industry. And this consumer agency is going to do its best to help turn that around.
Well, I congratulate you on your work and thank you for your service. I yield back.
Gentleman yield.
Thank you.
Would the gentleman yield?
I will yield 7
Chairman,
seconds.
my understanding is that your staff made an agreement with Professor Warren about her appearance today. The agreement was that she would be available to this committee for 1 hour. And pursuant to that agreement, if she accompanied your late-breaking request made by your staff at 9 p.m. last night, that she appear at an earlier time than previously scheduled, you would allow her to leave 1 hour after that at 2:15 p.m. in keeping with the agreement. It is 2:15 now. She kept her side of the bargain, and now it's time for you to keep yours. Mr. Chairman, I respect, out of respect for Professor Warren's schedule and the flexibility she showed to accommodate your request, you should now dismiss this witness and get on with the remainder of the hearing. I mean, in fairness, I mean, we were here.
I certainly appreciate it. And in reaction to you, as the ranking member, the original agreement was that we would have a 2 p.m. hearing in order to accommodate votes, which we expected to be at 1:30. Knowing that the professor is very busy, we don't want to keep witnesses here while we adjourn to go, or recess to go vote. And so we changed the time in anticipation of the vote we're about to have. So rather than gavel in and have opening statements and go to vote and come back 30 minutes later and have an hour of questions, rather than do that, we've tried to work with a witness. And exchanging of emails, your staffer, your government affairs staffer talked to Mr. Holler on the committee staff, and he asked for confirmation on this. He called you up. The government relations head did not respond to your email, called you up and said, I'll do my best to get you out of there, but we need to accommodate people's questions. And so that's where we are today. Mr. Cummings, I understand, and I certainly appreciate your question.
I just want to make it, I know you sound like you already decided, but just one real quick thing. Peter Haller, according to my staff, changed the time on us a few times. And they bent over backwards, moved things around, and agreed to 1:15 to 2:15. She needed to get out of here by 2:15. That has been constant, and Peter McHenry and his staff knew this.
Peter Holler, you said. Okay. because there is no Peter McHenry.
I just want to make it clear. I know you're going to do what you got to do, but out of respect for Ms. Warren, I mean, she's got her own limitations. She's trying to protect our constituents, yours and mine, big time.
And I would respond to the ranking member. I would respond to the ranking member that the date of this hearing was chosen by Ms. Warren. We worked with her and her staff diligently and gave them a number of options. They came back with different options. We accommodated those options in context for a hearing room. We're here to have the former chairman's unveiling of a picture in the main committee room.
Right.
So that's an accommodation, number one. Number two, we accommodated her schedule. That's why it's on this date.
Well,
furthermore, I'm skipping this vote, as are you, to have this debate rather than simply allow for a few additional minutes.
I'm going to get my vote in, but the only thing I'm saying is that at the rate we're going, it looks like she'll be here, what, until about 20 of at least.
Well, actually, I anticipate that the two members will have 5 minutes apiece. And as the gentleman knows, I kept folks to the 5-minute time frame today. So with that, I'm not trying to cause you problems, Ms. Warren, but we're trying to accommodate folks. And if you wanted to stick around, we're going to have 2 more members with questions, and then we'll see you off. It'll be just fine.
You are causing problems. We had an agreement for a later hearing. Your staff asked us to move around so that we had to change everything on my schedule to try to accommodate your time.
And I certainly appreciate that, but the original hearing was 2 o'clock.
That I would be out of here at 2:15 because there are other things now scheduled at 2:30.
That was a request, but we moved the hearing so that you could actually get the questions in.
Congressman, you told us one thing.
I did not tell you anything.
We have no one here to ask questions, Mr. Chairman. We have no one here to ask questions.
I have other obligations I committed to based on the representations of your staff and our effort to try to accommodate you and rearrange our schedule to accommodate you.
Look, Ms. Warren, it was a simple request. Your staff had a request. My staff said we're trying to accommodate you. We're going to get you out of here in 10 minutes.
No, Congressman, we had an agreement.
You had no agreement.
We had an agreement for the time this hearing would occur.
You're making this up, Ms. Warren.
You asked it.
Oh,
You're simply, this is not the case. This is not the case.
Mr. Chairman, you just did something that I'm trying to be cordial here, but you just accused the lady of lying.
She's accusing me of making an agreement that I never made.
I think you need to clear this up with your staff.
And I have.
They have moved this thing around 50 million times, and she's got to go to another hearing.
Congressman, not to another hearing, to another meeting.
To another meeting.
Congressman, I would be glad to answer questions for the record. We can do that on, if you'll just send us questions for the record, we're glad to answer them, and they'll be a matter of the public record.
I certainly appreciate that, and I've tried to accommodate you. I just want to be very clear and make sure that this is on the record. There was no agreement about departure time, and I want to just make sure to the ranking member that I didn't make those representations. I've confirmed with my staff before this thing started. The reason why we moved the times is so that she wouldn't have to wait during a vote in the middle of the hearing. So with that, I understand your frustration, but just ask you to see my side of this thing as well, because we thought we had you for more time. I thought I had you for more time.
Most respectful.
So with that, if the gentleman will simmer, I just I would just say
I'm cool. I just want to make sure she's treated fairly. I mean, that's all.
I understand. We've had more debate than actually the questions were remaining. So with that, Ms. Warren, I appreciate your service to our government. I do.
Thank you.
I was just trying to get on the record a few of these things that we've seen counter to my questions of you back in March of this year. And it is informative and instructive for this committee on the construct of this enormous bureau that you're constructing. And so that's why Congress wants to have this oversight. I thank you for your testimony. I'll dismiss you now, and I'll ask the 2 members that are not being given the opportunity to ask questions to submit theirs for the record, and I'd ask you to turn around those questions as quickly as you possibly could.
Thank you, Congressman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
All right. And we're going to recess for votes and come back for the second panel.